Now the topic I must contend with today carries with it the hope, the expectations, the insecurities and the fears of over 3,000 Ashokans who currently study or have studied at this university. Ashoka as an idea is failing. This statement itself is so loaded, so decisive in its expectation of a verdict that it's a little scary. It's scary because what we're essentially saying is that Ashoka University, which is basically all of us, the undergrads, the YFs, the MLS students, the postgrad, the faculty, we have all, in one way or the other, failed to realize the idea that compelled us to join this institution in the first place. That we're not immediately dismissing this notion shows how important it is to actually think about it. And yes, it's only been 5 years, we're too young, it's too soon to tell, all that is true, but that is also a cop-out answer. Precisely because we are so young, precisely because we don't have over a century of history to fall back upon, like other colleges and universities, precisely because we stand in this unique position to unite an idea and its articulation, create history, in other words, that it is so important to engage with the urgency that this topic poses. So, how valid is this claim that we are not stumbling, not lost, but failing? So here's where we begin. First, we must differentiate between an idea and an ideal. Between an ideal and an idea. Now the former is tangible, is straightforward in its demands and its articulation. There's the target, here's the dart. The latter, on the other hand, it's complex, it's abstract, it's subjective. So while one can measure living up to an ideal, the same cannot be said of an idea. This is because an ideal usually falls outside the self. It's like donning a hat or wearing a new shirt. It's easy to spot the difference. But an idea, it is part of the self. It's like the glimmer in one's eye, the purpose in one's walk, the smirk on one's lips. Those can't be donned and discarded at will. They are manifestations of a fundamental part of the self. So then, rigorous academia, transparent and efficient institutions like the admin, the student government, cash, caddy, SHB, etc., adequate living facilities for the residents of the campus. These are ideals that Ashoka must strive towards. They pose complex problems and they have complex solutions, but they can be arrived at by way of policy. They alone, however, don't define the Ashokan idea. In fact, much of these ideals are informed by the Ashokan idea. So now for that, we must broaden the scope of the argument. To do this, we must think of ideals as part of, but distinct from the idea that defines Ashoka University. While ideals can be achieved, ideas cannot. An idea is like an ever-receding mirage down a road in the desert. Realizing it is necessarily an incomplete project. It's like it's a striving towards, a becoming. It's always a work in progress. So the best we can do then is try and identify some of the many sides of the Ashokan idea, to try and make sense of it through this impenetrable fog, smog of confusion. Now, immediately the cynics amongst us will define the Ashokan identity in its cliched form, which is basically a bunch of myopic, self-serving, entitled hedonists that are woefully detached from reality, and they while away their time and resources doing the bare minimum of what they should be doing. And the self-critical lot that we are, it is easy to fall into such a trap. That is, however, only a figment of the truth, and while such thoughts make for a decent satire series on eating, they by no means capture the normative Ashokan identity. So, until now, the Ashokan idea is still unclear, and so it is also unclear how we are failing. The political atmosphere of Delhi University plays no small part in the intellectual and ideological fervor amongst the students and faculty there. It is part and parcel of living in the heart of the world that students can be lynched, professors can go missing, reporters can be shot. These events breed rebellion, and it allows ideas to manifest themselves in the form of action. Ashoka, on the other hand, is situated somewhere in the middle of nowhere, and I think this geographical ambiguity reflects on our existential state of mind. If an opposing force is necessary to define the self, whom do we define ourselves against? surrounded by villages and paddy fields and a defunct college in our backyard, who do we, Ashokans, unite against? What do we stand for? We are a gated community, sharply cut off from the very world that we so industriously study, in theory, every single day. The cultural composition of our student body also creates an intellectual echo chamber that, over time, breeds inauthenticity, a feeling of indifference at best, of fraudulence at worst. We are becoming those fabled armchair philosophers who just know the right from the wrong, if only we ever had a chance to prove it. So, of course, that doesn't mean that we're not doing anything. It merely means that we're not doing quite as much as we should, as we could be doing. Defining ourselves then begins with learning about our subjective reality in the world we inhabit. It begins with knowing ourselves as a collective and then as individuals that comprise it. Integral to answering the question about the Ashokan identity is to know what we believe in. What is our telos? What is our goal as a university? The big question, who are we, is one that needs answering. Now, in attempting to define ourselves, to define this idea, I'm not suggesting that we begin a process of homogenization. Our collective identity as Ashokans cannot be based off of this a set of mechanized views and united hatred against someone or something. Inclusivity, both among students currently on campus and for future batches as they come in, is of paramount importance. So how do we do this? For this, liberal values, at least in theory, are the surest way we have of not falling into prejudiced compartments of right and wrong. Liberal values that prevent us from molding as a unit prematurely, before we even understand ourselves, before we give ourselves some time, is what will come to shape the Ashokan idea over time. Liberal values then are what we must strive towards in order to gain an identity. And this is also how the Ashokan idea will necessarily remain incomplete. We are forever growing and crumbling at the same time. It's a paradox, and while immediate solutions may not be forthcoming, we can learn to live with the questions as we slowly bleed into the answers. With this in mind, how can we say that the Ashokan idea is failing if we haven't even come close to comprehending it in the first place? Surely, part of the problem lies in the implementation and articulation of whatever little we do understand. And the other part of the problem, and in my opinion the only way we are actually failing, is that we have not taken this problem seriously enough. So, the very many problems we face as an institution today, a lot of which has been raised by the opposition, are perfectly valid and they have to be dealt with. The point I'd like to highlight on is that our shortcomings are not permanent. There is still hope, still the possibility for growth and change, and that is how we will not fail. Our youth is our greatest asset, right? Ultimately, living within the confines of these four walls and sitting in on a few classes doesn't make us Ashokan. It's something far more complicated. So let's stop and think for a moment. Maybe our existential limbo is potential. We aren't committed yet. We're still volatile, still full of chaos. And a mustachioed German will agree when I say we are primed to give birth to a dancing star. Thank you very much.